Welcome back to Sane-ish. I'm Jo Carducci, and if you're feeling like the world is spinning a little faster and a lot more recklessly than usual, you're not alone. This week, we're watching the fallout from yet another foreign policy crisis, a Senate floor that feels more like a battlefield than a chamber of ideas, and a White House that seems determined to test the limits of democracy and decency. But here's the thing. Even in the middle of all of this chaos, there are still leaders fighting for sanity, for working people, and for the truth. And today, we are talking to one of them. Last week, on my birthday, as a matter of fact, I took my kids to Washington, D.C., because I was invited to attend a hearing on what Democrats are calling the big, beautiful betrayal bill, not the big, beautiful bill, not what I call the Billionaire Boner Bill. I wanted to hear people testifying about the real world impacts of this catastrophic legislation that Senate Republicans have actually somehow managed to exacerbate. So Senators Chris Murphy and Tim Kaine hosted this incredible hearing, and I heard real stories from real Americans, including one mother of an autistic child who talked about the fact that even though she was an attorney and her husband had a good job as well, without the money Medicaid provides their family, their son would simply not be able to get the services he needs. And we're talking about at least almost 11 states worth of Americans being kicked off of their healthcare coverage. And not to mention what this will do to nutrition assistance and SNAP benefits for millions of families who rely on that assistance. And so I was down there to talk to as many senators as I could. Time only allowed for me to talk to Senator Chris Murphy, but I was so happy to do that because Chris Murphy is a true champion and advocate for educating and informing the American people and standing up and speaking out against the tyranny of what Republicans are trying to impose that will have impacts on our country for generations to come. So with that, my guest today is Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, a voice you've heard cutting through the noise on everything from gun violence prevention to foreign policy to the fight for workers' rights. Senator Murphy has been a relentless advocate for democracy and a critic of political corruption. He's also been on the front lines of the battle to block reckless arms deals, defend veterans' health care, and call out the dangers of unregulated AI and the erosion of our institutions. Whether he's launching new efforts to mobilize voters or challenging his own party to do better, Senator Murphy is never afraid to say what needs to be said, even when it's uncomfortable. Senator Murphy, thank you so much for joining us on Sane-ish. Hi, guys. I am here on Capitol Hill at the Hart Building with Senator Murphy, who is hosting. Is it hosting, right?
I'm hosting.
Hosting,
Sure.
sounds like a party that's not a party.
Right, not a party.
A hearing related to what I call the Billionaire Boner Bill. That's not what you call it. That's what I call it.
Oh, so maybe I'll start calling it pass.
I mean, let's
be accurate.
Yeah, let's be accurate. But because you're calling it the big betrayal bill, and that is what it is. And I've listened to some testimony this morning already, this afternoon already, that has broken my heart about this not being an economic issue. This is a human issue. We were hearing stories of real Americans who will be paying the price for the richest people in this country to get tax cuts that they don't need, up to $270,000 a year back in tax cuts. So I can't even fathom making $270,000 a year.
Yeah, most Americans can't, and that's the new tax cut that somebody making the highest income in America is going to get. Joe, thanks for being here and helping to tell the stories of the families that are testifying today. We were just talking about one of the groups that's here. They're called the Little Lobbyists. They are quite literally children and their parents who are here, very disabled, very medically complex kids who rely on Medicaid, who literally couldn't be alive without Medicaid. And it is just so painful to think about a group of elected officials who decide that their job is to rip away coverage and resources from those families who are dealing with kids with Down syndrome, kids with even more complicated illnesses that are permanently in wheelchairs, that can't survive without oxygen and feeding tubes. And for what? To be able to give these massive, brand new tax breaks to corporations and billionaires. It's bad policy, like it's going to tank our economy, but that's not even the most important part. It's just fundamentally immoral. It's fundamentally immoral. And we're trying to break through in these last couple weeks of debate and this hearing to allow these families and some experts to tell the true story of the bill is, a last gasp attempt to try to convince a handful of Republicans to do the right thing here.
Yeah, I mean, hearing those stories, everybody can relate to this. It's not some, abstract idea. These are people that we know. These are people in our families. This is us. Listening to the attorney, talking about her son with Down syndrome. My uncle had Down syndrome, and my uncle that was, decades ago, and they didn't have the kinds of services in place now that they have. She was talking about, as an attorney, she can't afford her 1-year-old son's care, even with her income. She needs Medicaid so that he can survive and thrive. And we talked a little bit off camera about how I was a paraprofessional for a long time. A whole different conversation that does kind of come back to the SNAP benefits, but the critical importance of the services that we provide for these children would be ripped from them. And they didn't ask for this. They're not committing acts of fraud. They're children and vulnerable members of our community who need this support to survive.
Yeah, so let's talk about who's on Medicaid, right? Because you probably don't even know the Medicaid program because it's not called Medicaid in most states. Every state calls it something different. In Connecticut, it's the Husky program. In Wisconsin, it's Badger Care. But 1/4 of all Americans get their health insurance from Medicaid, and most all those people are working, right? They're just working in jobs that don't provide health care or don't pay enough so that you can afford health care. So when you're talking about throwing 16 million people off of their health care, maybe about 10 million of those will be coming off of Medicaid. You're talking about working Americans. You're talking about that attorney who was testifying before us today, who can only get health care for her and her family through the Medicaid program. So yes, Medicaid does cover really medically complex people who can't work because of their disability, their illness, but it also just covers a lot of working families. And again, we're going to throw 16 million people off their health care just so that you can pad the pockets of billionaires. That's what happens when you have a guy like Donald Trump in charge, who spends all of his time out on the golf course with his billionaire corporate buddies. He thinks that they're the only people that matter. And so, yeah, they actually think this is a beautiful bill. They think it's actually a beautiful thing to kick little kids off of their health care in order to pad the pockets of their golf country club buddies.
And these are people who don't understand what it's like to go through your day hungry.
Yes.
And again, something I saw as a public school educator was I saw kids that the only meal they got was the meals that they were provided at school. And the SNAP impact here, the food assistance, nutrition assistance impact here, it absolutely devastates me. I was listening to one of the panelists talking. She was from the state of Alabama. She said, with every food bank and donation that they get, that SNAP provides 9 meals for every one. And the state of Alabama would not be able to provide that assistance on their own without the help that they get from the federal government. And the program is not easy, by the way. Also, the threshold for people to be eligible for it and to receive those benefits is not easy for them to get. But the impacts, again, on our most vulnerable, but on our children. Like I talk about this a lot. I'm very open about this. When I first separated right ahead of COVID and I was a paraprofessional making barely, minimum wage, I had to decide if I was going to pay the oil bill or if I was going to pay for groceries. The point where my friends were hiding groceries in my car so my kids didn't know that I couldn't afford to feed them. These are real, and I was working. These are real issues, but the cruelty here and the immorality here of hurting disproportionately the most vulnerable to be hurting our kids and families and us.
So one of the things we heard today in a testimony is that the lowest income families in the country are going to lose $800 per year. If you are a family that's making, say, $20,000 a year, right? You are literally living paycheck to paycheck. You are making those decisions every single week about whether you are paying for your kid to have shoes, whether you're paying for the medicine you need, whether you're getting any Christmas gifts at all for your children. $800 out of your annual income every single year, that's like life and death stuff. It's life and death stuff. And yet it speaks to the priorities here. They know that. It's not like they don't know that. Republicans know this, and yet they're still doing it because to them, that doesn't matter. To them, all that matters is, whether their friends can buy a 5th yacht or a 7th vacation home. That's what's happening here. Another person on the panel said this is going to be the most massive transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of the country. Like, who's asking for that? Like, who's asking for it except for those super rich people? Like, even folks in the middle of the economy, who might not have as much of an impact here, they don't want to see a massive transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. But that's what we're on the verge of doing if we don't stop it. And it's not too late. That's the thing, Joe. We can stop this. Everybody said we couldn't stop the repeal of the Affordable Care Act back in 2017. But some of these same families, the exact same families that are here today, were up on Capitol Hill in 2017. We did stop it. It's not too late to stop this bill right now.
And it is massively unpopular.
Massively unpopular.
Yeah, the more we educate the American people on what is in this bill and what it will do to families like theirs, the less popular it is.
But still, 1/3 of Americans don't know that it exists because Donald Trump is really good at distracting you every single day. This is the main story. This is the thing that matters more than anything else right now.
Yeah.
Because we have a chance to stop it in the coming weeks.
I want to just really quickly wrap with that idea of the distraction, because this is so important and something you have been so good at, is reminding people through all of this, because we have to talk about all of the things that are happening. We have to talk about all of his insanity, but we have to also remember that we can't get distracted from focusing on what this is and what it will do to generations in this country, because the deficit alone, that impact, but he very much would like us to be looking at the shiny objects over here only and always. And I saw people giving you some shit for like, what are you doing, Senator Murphy? We can talk about this. We don't have to talk about that. And you're like, well, actually, we could do both.
You can do both. And listen, what happened, for instance, in Los Angeles with the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines, that's a big deal. It is. But it's okay to admit that what he's likely trying to do is to distract you from the policy that's going to have the biggest impact.
Right.
And this will have enormous impact. There's one estimate suggesting thousands of people will die because of the withdrawal of healthcare all across the country. So we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah.
We've got to talk about the destruction of the rule of law, but we still do have to spend most of our time right now. Again, right now, because it's literally going to come up for a vote in the Senate next week. Right now, we have to make the decision to spend most of our time talking about this budget bill because we have a chance to stop it.
We do. And everybody out there, go and talk to your friends, talk to your family members, talk to the grocery clerks, talk to anybody you can. You don't have to do if you go knocking on doors, you just have to tell people what is happening and point them in the right direction of the truth, which Senator Murphy, you are an unbelievable advocate for and a voice for. And I appreciate you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Well, Joe, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I want to thank Senator Murphy and thank you for joining me today, too. If you took something from this conversation, if you're feeling a little more hopeful, a little more fired up, or just a little less alone, please rate and review Sane, share it with your friends, and join our community on Substack and YouTube. Remember, democracy doesn't defend itself, and neither does sanity. So stay strong, stay sane-ish, and keep demanding better, because the fight is far from over.